What if the story of this planet has always been longer than the story we tell of ourselves? What if, buried deep beneath continents, swallowed by tides, erased by wind, lay the faintest outlines of civilizations that were not our own? We stand only in one chapter of Earth's vast diary, and yet we speak as if we know the full book, as if the pages before us carry no handwriting. But rocks are not blank, and silence is not empty. The world remembers in ways we barely understand. As we close our eyes and lean into the rhythm of deep time, we see our own scale shrink. Humanity has been writing for only 5,000 years, farming for 10,000, shaping metals for perhaps 12. Yet the Earth is 4.5 billion years old. Whole oceans have opened and closed. Mountain ranges as tall as the Himalayas have risen and worn flat again. Ice sheets have come and gone like slow breaths in and out. In just the blink of geological time, entire landscapes vanish. So if something once moved across this planet's surface, how easily might it have disappeared? We often imagine fossilized bones and ancient temples as inevitable records, but fossils form rarely, only under precise and protective circumstance. Bones collapse, wood returns to soil, clay crumbles back into riverbeds. Even the strongest architecture, left untended, becomes sediment within a few million years. The odds are not in preservation's favor, they are in forgetting's favor. The tilt of the Earth, the steady circulation of oceans, the pull of gravity, all are agents of memory loss. They fold away traces until, for us, they no longer exist. And yet, there are whispers. In the faint residues of isotopes settled into clay, in spikes of carbon where wildfire or furnace may have burned, in minerals that seem out of place in the quiet order of chemistry, we glimpse questions. Scientists know of the Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, 56 million years ago, when Earth suddenly warmed, carbon surged, and climate staggered. A natural event, we think. Perhaps volcanic. But sometimes we pause on that thought. Could it be that this shift was not only geologic, but technologic? Could once long ago an intelligence burned fuel, changed the air, rose and fell, and left no story behind? Perhaps unlikely, perhaps impossible, but not unimaginable. And what of the sea? Nearly 70% of Earth's surface is ocean, and civilizations known to us often flourished on coasts. But coasts are restless places. 300 feet of rising seas can swallow entire worlds. During the last ice age, the waterline was far lower, exposing plains where people, or perhaps others, could have walked. Today those plains lie flooded, miles offshore, smothered in silt, unreachable by simple digging. What might rest there, in darkness and silence, erased not because it never was, but because the ocean has chosen to keep it hidden. Memory, when we listen closely, is fragile in every form. Consider language, one generation without speakers, and it collapses into soundless dust. Consider stories, painted on rock, one cycle of rain, one season of frost, and the pigment fades. Even in us, memories slip away as hours stretch. Why should the memory of the planet itself be anything more secure? Perhaps forgetting is not an accident, but Earth's pulse, her soft insistence that all things must return to stillness. And still we ask, could there be signs? Not monuments, not faces, but stranger fossils, deeper than bone, a shard of melted glass that could be lightning or smelting, a seam of altered mineral that could be volcanic or industrial, a subtle curve in strata that might speak of quarrying, building, breaking. These are anomalies that scientists seek carefully, for to claim more is dangerous, but to wonder is safe. To wonder is essential. Perhaps no other civilization walked here, and the silence is exactly what it seems. Perhaps we are the first to look into the night sky, and ask who else could be looking back. Or perhaps we are not first at all. Perhaps we are echoes, repeating a rhythm that beat long before us, and will beat long after. Echoes shaped by entropy, echoes not of permanence but of cycles. Every question we lay upon the earth is softened by her silence, answered not in words but in dust. And yet, if this much can be lost, what else might we have forgotten? And so we drift onward, carried by the unsteady echo of that thought. If so much can be forgotten, can stone itself remember? Not through language, not through symbols, but through pressure, fracture, heat. Rocks, though silent, are not passive. They bend, they break, they crystallize, they layer, and in those layers they hold stories measured in unimaginable time. To touch a piece of shale is to lift a page older than forests, older than birds, older even than most continents themselves. It is to hold not just an object, but an archive, waiting beneath stillness. When we speak of memory, we think of something fragile, slipping from our minds before dawn. But the Earth's memory is slow, almost stubborn. It does not tell us what we want to know quickly. It resists our impatience. Sediment must bury deeply to escape wind. Minerals must grow atom by atom, lattice upon lattice, to store their tales of chemistry. A zircon crystal may hold radioactive isotopes that whisper of billions of years gone by, locked like a time capsule. From these grains, no larger than sand, whole eras unfold when studied with patient eyes. Stone, then, is a kind of diary, written not with ink, but with decay. And still, can stone keep more than chemistry? Could it also carry traces of intention, of action, of touch, from another intelligence? If rivers carry sand from quarries once cut by unknown hands, if heat hardens fragments changed not by volcanoes but by fire built with purpose, would we know the difference today? Maybe, maybe not. Because erosion blurs edges, melting all patterns back into uncertainty. Yet the truth remains that stone is imperfect as a historian. It keeps much, but it also loses much. An earthquake folds an entire landscape onto itself. Subduction drags whole continents into the deep mantle, recycling surface into molten flow. What civilizations, if any, might have been erased entirely by such recycling? To the rocks that remain, it is as though those stories were never written at all. The deepest amnesia is geological. And yet, even without direct evidence, the possibility stirs something within us. To think of rocks as memory is to step outside our smallness, to see that the ground beneath us has witnessed billions of dawns, billions of tides, billions of extinctions, and within those cycles, what if civilizations not like ours brushed briefly against the sunlight, then faded into stone before we were here to notice? Consider the fossils pressed flat into shale, the leaves of giant ferns, the wings of flying reptiles, the bodies of fishes caught mid-swim. These are not just images, they are imprints of events once alive. The stone remembered their outlines when everything else was erased. So then, what imprints might we overlook, assuming they are only natural? A pattern too regular in a strata, dismissed as coincidence. A seam of fused minerals that looks volcanic, but perhaps was something shaped differently long before. Science teaches us caution, but imagination compels us to pause at the possibility. The Earth writes slowly, yet forgets almost everything fast. A city today, abandoned, crumbles in centuries. In 10,000 years, it is foundation and rubble. In 1 million, merely mineral. In 100 million, erased as if it never was. Unless by chance it is captured intact, locked within a perfect cocoon of burial. Unless by chance we stumble upon the right stone, open at the right fracture, and glimpse a sliver that whispers, something was here. And so we find ourselves between knowing and not knowing, holding rocks that do remember, but will never explain. They record temperatures, compositions, impacts, eruptions, and maybe more, but they do not interpret. That is our role, to lean into their silence and ask, what is this shape, this anomaly, this ghost in the record? What story is hidden, not because it was never told, but because memory is always partial, fractured, half-stated. This is the paradox that pulls us deeper. Rocks are both the keepers of everything we know about prehistory and the veil over everything we may never know. They hold secrets in isotope clocks and magnetic fields, and yet their pages are endlessly missing. They are memory and oblivion bound tightly together. We are always listening, but never hearing fully, always reading, but never receiving the complete line. And so we wonder, not loudly, not with urgency, but softly, like a lullaby, what could stone have seen, but lost? Could it be that whole lifetimes, whole cultures, whole intelligences have been blurred beneath the weight of its silence? The evidence, if it exists at all, may never be bright, may never be obvious. It may only be felt as an absence, a haunting gap where the memory should be clear, but instead is blurred, unstable, far away. Maybe the rocks are not keeping memories for us. Maybe we are only projecting our need to remember onto them. Maybe a stone is just a stone, and its silence is final. But then, when we run our fingers across a fossil fern press, or a ripple mark hardened from waves long gone, we know the silence is not empty. It holds traces, shadows, echoes, not because they last perfectly, but because some things resist forgetting just enough to reach us, just enough to remind us that forgetting is never total. And if even stone can hold a memory, however rare, however faint, then we must ask, what other memories lie buried deeper still, waiting to be recognized for what they are? And so, if stone can sometimes hold memory, then what forms of memory might fire preserve? What fossils of flame and signal could linger after the bodies, after the bones, after the voices are gone? Fire is not soft like stone, not gradual like sediment. Fire is sudden, restless, impatient, yet it leaves behind a residue of permanence, traces that can outlast flesh, wood, fibre, and bone. When we imagine fossils, we think of shells pressed into limestone, or vertebrae turned to mineral. But what if other fossils exist? Fossils born of fire, of signal, of intention. Could heat itself leave an artifact, a memory that whispers across millions of years? When lightning strikes sand, it can fuse it into glassy tubes called fulgurites, delicate hollows that are, in their strange way, fossils of a single electrical moment. A fire that spread across a forest may leave charcoal preserved in layers of sediment. These are natural processes, yet they show us a truth. Energy, when sharp enough, can etch itself into the record of the earth. Now imagine intelligence, deliberate fire, controlled signal. If unknown civilizations, biological or otherwise, once existed, then perhaps their imprint would be found not in bones or faces, but in these strange remains of energy turned solid. Think of obsidian, the volcanic glass used by humans for tools and blades. Nature makes it, yes, but so do makers. Layers of ash reveal both eruption and survival, both chaos and craft. If something before us learned to smelt ore, to melt sand, to harness heat, could we distinguish their fingerprints from the purely geological? A slab of fused minerals might seem ordinary, volcanic, yet in possibility lies the tremor. What if some are technofossils, left behind by fires kindled long ago? Signal, too, may leave a fossil. The magnetic fields of Earth are recorded in cooling lava, held like invisible ink, telling us which way north once pointed millions of years ago. But what of stronger signals? A sudden surge of radiation, a pattern impressed into sediment, an isotope anomaly inconsistent with nature's rhythms. Scientists already trace faint fingerprints of supernovas, written in isotopes like iron-60 carried to Earth across cosmic distances. Could a technological signal leave just such a marker, tiny, invisible, but permanent enough to last longer than cities, longer than mountains? And if such a signal exists, have we already seen it, only to call it something else? Perhaps we have, without realizing. The record brims with moments where Earth changes suddenly, beyond easy explanation. A spike of soot, a level of carbon, a layer of glassy debris found on multiple continents. Often the answer is asteroid, volcano, wildfire, or all three. Science proceeds this way, cautiously, and yet the speculation remains like a shadow. Could these not also be the ashes of industry, the fossils of great fire long before us? We do not know. We may never know. But to lean into the question is to feel time expand around us. There is humility here, for what we imagine as permanence is fragile. A broadcast slips into space, fainting into silence after light years, but a burnt layer of coal-black soot may remain pressed into rock for 50 million years. The irony is striking. Our songs and stories, if sent on airwaves, may vanish into distance almost instantly, but the smoke from a single fire may outlast every word we've ever spoken. Memory chooses strangely. Memory prefers chance over intent, silence over speech. And so we return to the notion of fossils, not only of bodies but of energy, of tools, of choices. A plastic bead may outlast the written word. A concrete block, once hardened, may survive longer than a name. These are our fossils of fire and signal, our legacy in waiting. And if this is true for us, could it not also have been true for others? Perhaps their version of plastic was absorbed into strata, so old we no longer know what we are looking at. Perhaps their broadcast signals never reached beyond the height of their own sky. Perhaps their fire burned only briefly, leaving no more than a seam in stone that no one now knows to question. What, then, counts as permanence in a world decided by entropy? Not bodies, not voices. Sometimes only residue remains. Residue of fire, residue of signal, residue of a life we cannot quite imagine. And as we press our hand against the cold surface of basalt, or run fingers along a shard of volcanic glass, the thought lingers, could this be ordinary? Could this be intentional? Is there even a boundary at all? The beauty and sadness lie together. We will never know fully, not because answers are not there, but because deep time has no interest in clarity. It blurs, it fractures, it recycles, until every story resembles every other. A fossil of bone, a fossil of fire, a fossil of signal, all swept into the same silence, indivisible, inseparable, and so we whisper to ourselves, not to solve it, but to feel it. What if the fire that came before was not lightning, not eruption, but hand? What if we walk daily upon the ashes of vanished civilizations without recognition? And so the silence grows heavier, holding us not with answers, but with possibility. Possibility that rocks are not inert at all, but resonant with signals, some from lightning, some from stars, and maybe some from lives long forgotten. We cannot hear them now, but the stone, the glass, the isotopes, they are still here. They do not speak, yet they remain, and that is enough to unsettle, enough to invite wonder, enough to keep us asking if fire can fossilize, if signal can harden into sediment, then what other forces of forgetting and remembering are shaping the story of Earth around us? And so, if fire can carve its ghost into stone, if signals can linger without language, then what might entropy itself reveal as an eraser, but also as a quiet author of meaning? There is a word woven through every vanished thing, a silent drift that hums through stone and starlight alike: entropy. It is not cruelty, but inevitability, a soft dissolving, a gradual unmaking. Entropy does not snatch memory with violent hands. It loosens every knot, smooths every sharpness, bleaches color, erodes edges, turns brimming stories to faint imprints lost among the layers. We are taught to grieve this slow forgetting, but perhaps it is the only way the planet breathes, exhaling the weight of countless epochs, making space for new song and silence. We measure entropy in the cooling of stars, in the fading of footprints, in the way a city yields to lichen, wind, and time. Buried beneath the familiar soil lies not just the fossil of a bone or the ghost of a flame, but the long record of small disappointments, names erased, languages without heirs, civilizations scattered to dust and reimagined only as myth. Even now, as we cross landscapes and peer at outcrops, we encounter entropy's handiwork. A core of ice captures a moment of atmosphere, a band of clay holds the fallout of a faraway eruption, but everything else, the context, the laughter, the meaning has ebbed away. Is it possible that entropy is not merely an eraser, but a quiet author? What if forgetting is not end but transformation? A way the earth folds one story into another, blending triumph and disaster until the boundaries blur. Perhaps it is not a failure of memory when the details are lost, but a creative act, weaving new patterns from threads of rumor and trace, so that each era borrows from the last without ever truly knowing it. We long to believe in the permanence of our own records, and yet every archive crumbles eventually, every monument returns to sand. What then does the earth remember when memory itself is fragile, when minerals shift and atoms wander, when geological processes spin the walls of time so fast they bend straight lines into spirals? A message left in bone becomes calcium for new life, a word painted in ochre fades where rain seeps through porous stone, yet even in loss, a pattern persists. Entropy does not wipe the slate clean, but layers it with palimpsests, remnants upon remnants, a haunted collage. We find comfort in the persistence of decay itself, for it means that something always remains though transformed beyond intention. And so, as we look into the slow crumbling of histories, our own and those perhaps older than us, we find the echo of a gentle question. Not, why was everything forgotten, but what shapes does forgetting leave behind? Sometimes, the absence rings louder than any evidence. A missing mountain range hints at ancient collision. An inexplicable void in fossil beds suggests a silence born from catastrophic loss. Even in physics, the slow draining away of order carries fingerprints we can trace, clues written not in presence but in yearning gaps. Maybe entropy is a kind of dark creativity, inviting us to imagine what must have once existed to leave so faint a mark. Maybe the slow melting of memory is how the earth keeps secrets, or teaches humility, or nurtures the perpetual drive to discover the way a long corridor, dimly lit, always draws us to step quietly forward. And maybe, as we witness the pace of erasure, we sense that we are part of this process too. Our own time will ebb, our own traces will scatter, even our questions will become as soft as silt, and as wide as the ocean's deep plains. Yet the mind resists the full loss. We gather what entropy leaves behind, a shard of unfathomable age, a scrap of charred earth, an isotope with an unexplained parent. We build stories from these leftovers, weaving meaning where nature has washed most meaning away. The world's memory, shaped as much by oblivion as by record, invites not certainty but a kind of reverence, a willingness to sit with gaps, to honor even the spaces where all else has collapsed. Perhaps, then, it is entropy that keeps every story open-ended, never truly finished, never entirely erased. The journey between memory and forgetting is not linear, but circular, a tide that withdraws, returns and recedes again. We are left with the hum of lost voices, the half-images glimpsed in layered stone, the possibility that what vanishes is never gone but merely changed, dissolved, awaiting new eyes to wonder, new hands to search. And yet, if the patient hand of entropy can unwrite so much, what witness remains to time's passage, besides the silence itself? Could there be places where, amid all this gentle loss, the ocean remembers what even the rocks have let slip? Could it be that the oceans remember what the land forgets? While entropy sweeps across mountains and winds erase stone by grain, the ocean holds a slower kind of silence, layering memory upon memory on its deep floor. Sediments drift like falling snow, settling into strata that whisper of ancient climates, vanished creatures, even sudden cataclysms. The seas themselves are vast libraries, and yet, like so many hidden archives, their shelves are mostly beyond our reach. For millions of years, civilizations, ours and any that may have come before, have been drawn to the coastlines. Shorelines nourish life. They gather rivers, carry fertile silt, feed fish, invite trade and movement. But coastlines are also fragile, restlessly shifting boundaries between land and water. As ice ages breathe in and out, as glaciers wax and wane, seas rise hundreds of feet, then fall again. With each movement, entire landscapes vanish, flooded plains, river valleys, forests, perhaps even cities. If anything came before us, if any intelligence left its mark near those shores, the ocean has long since claimed them. The continental shelves tell only part of that story. What was dry ground 20,000 years ago now lies drowned beneath restless waves. Imagine a structure, or many, slowly surrendered, first to storm surges, then to tides, then buried beneath centuries of sand. Today, sonar scans reveal ghost-like patterns in some seabeds, curious ridges and straight angles. Are they natural? Almost certainly, but perhaps not entirely. The ocean keeps its secrets well, draping them in silt and coral, confusing wreck with reef and turning artifact into stone. And deeper still, beneath the sunlit surface, the abyssal plains stretch for miles in every direction, dark archives no light has touched, where sediments fall, millimeter by millimeter, carrying memories of atmosphere and biology. Each thin layer is a page, written in dust blown from continents, in shells of plankton, in grains of volcanic ash, drifting down from some eruption far away. Scientists drill cores from these layers, pulling from the seafloor slender cylinders of time itself. Within them rest shifts in temperature, in chemistry, in isotopes. Even the story of human industry, the sudden rise of carbon, of plastics, of radionuclides, lies etched into those pages. And if our marks endure, why not others? Could traces of an intelligence long erased be entombed in sediments, waiting quietly at depths we have barely touched? Oceans are not only keepers of silt, they are sculptors of fossils, sunken bones from whales, fish, and once, perhaps, creatures entirely unknown settle into darkness. Life continues to cling even there, worming through rib cages, feeding slowly until all that remains is mineral. If ancient beings once ventured into the sea, if their tools or vessels sank to the bottom, what form would they take millions of years later? Would we recognize them as instruments of design, or would we mistake them for natural stone? The longer time moves, the harder it becomes to distinguish intention from coincidence. And the ocean is patient. It does not hasten to reveal. It folds its memories into trenches thousands of feet deep, into currents that circle the globe continuously, into waves that erode evidence even as they create new shores. Whole continents have been drawn back under by subduction zones, where seafloors dive beneath mountains, dragging their layers into the furnace of the mantle, erasing all anniversaries, all records. Yet just above, in the quiet drape of sediments, the ocean still writes its story grain by grain, thin but unbroken. Perhaps what fascinates us most is not the evidence we might find, but the possibility of evidence already lost. The sea reminds us how complete forgetting can be. It teaches us humility in the face of disappearance. We know there are ruins of our own making now under the water, villages swallowed by dams, ports drowned by storms, island coasts claimed by rising tides. Even these, which we once grieved in headlines, are already becoming reef and silt, dissolved swiftly into anonymity. In centuries, they will be difficult to find. In millennia, they will be indistinguishable from natural stone. Our memory of them will outlive their presence, but not by long. And still we wonder, what if deep down, resting in cold blackness, is a relic we cannot yet interpret? A seam of alloy mistaken for volcanic ore, a pattern too precise to be dismissed as chance. Could the oceans hold the faint reminiscence of a civilization older than ours, sealed away not by myth, but by water's patient forgetting? We cannot say. All we can do is listen to the slow rhythm of tides, to the endless withdrawal and return, and allow the question to remain. And perhaps that is all the ocean asks of us, an openness to its witness. We may never drain its silence, never lift every stone, never unweave every record, but when the sea brushes the shore, when it folds our own fragile stories into its great blue chest, it is a reminder that forgetting does not kill memory. It only changes where the memory is kept, not in ink, not in monuments, but in the gentle weight of water, the drifting of silt, the press of silence. And so we are left again on the edge of wonder, leaning closer to the surf and asking if the oceans can conceal so much. If entire landscapes can disappear within them, then perhaps the very dust that covers deserts and glaciers too is hiding stories we've never thought to look for. Dust may seem meaningless, a soft nuisance that settles on windowsills, that chokes the wind in forgotten rooms, that paints deserts with haze at dawn. But on Earth, dust is more than debris. It is time given body. Every layer of dust is a calendar of what has passed. Pollen carried from once flowering trees, volcanic ash spread across continents by winds, fine grains ground from stone by glaciers. To walk across a desert, or to touch a glacier's surface, is to brush against time itself, resting grain by grain, waiting to be remembered. Dust falls everywhere, silently, endlessly. In Greenland, layers of ice trap it, holding millennia of atmospheric history in delicate strata, as precise as lines on a page. In dry caves, dust settles on ancient floors, entombing bones, tools, seeds, betraying presence to those who might dig thousands of years later. On the seafloor, dust mixes with plankton shells, drifting down like snow, steady, without haste. Though it feels insubstantial, dust is one of Earth's most faithful archivists, yet it also smothers. It conceals what treasures might lie invisible beneath miles of desert drift, or encased within frozen silence, blurred to us by the uniform mask of dust. Civilizations have risen on dust, and collapsed with it. The loams of rivers are made of fine particles, blowing in from lands reduced to powder, giving birth to fertile plains and harvests. But deserts too are born of dust, as forests fall to drought and soils erode into lifeless storms that swallow whole landscapes. Dust tells us of expansion and collapse, always recording, always reshaping. If we imagine, even for a moment, that another people once walked here long before us, how easily could their marks have been veiled beneath shifting sands? Entire cities might lie beneath the Sahara, not as standing ruins, but as softened shapes worn to ridges, and covered wholly by dust storms that return again and again. Scientists read these grains through isotopes, chemical signatures left like microscopic fingerprints. From them we learn the journey of winds, the intensity of past fires, the deserts that once bloomed with grass, the fertile valleys that withered into silence. A pinch of dust can speak more eloquently than stone, for it is carried everywhere, spread across seas, frozen into ice, swallowed by lungs. Dust crosses continents, erasing borders, binding the entire earth in one breath. But if it is capable of transfixing whole histories, volcanic eruptions, supernovae, meteors striking Earth, what else might be hidden within those same fragile grains? Could evidence of another, older order of intelligence lie ground into particles, so fine they pass unnoticed in the wind? A compound out of place, too complex to be natural, a pattern of combustion not matching any known wildfire. Perhaps their traces sparkle under our microscopes, and we explain them away as anomalies, irregularities, mistakes. The story of Earth, when read through dust, is crowded with accidents, interruptions, and unresolved questions. What if some of those questions are fragments of civilizations, worn so small we have mistaken them for noise in the data? Dust is both guardian and assassin. It buries, protecting fragile remains from sun and storm, but over time it suffocates, pressing weight upon weight until all sharpness blurs, a carving fades, a wall crumbles, bones become indistinguishable from soil. Dust levels us, reducing marble and flesh alike to the same anonymous substance. Not out of malice, but out of obedience to time's law, all things are meant to become something else, carried forward, not in form but in residue. Close your eyes and imagine the desert at night. A cold wind moves, carrying tiny particles that have traveled farther than we will ever walk. Dust from the Gobi finds its way to the Pacific. Dust from the Sahara feeds the Amazon rainforest, nourishing life half a world away. Dust from pollen that bloomed 50,000 years ago lies frozen in Arctic ice to this day. Dust holds no bias, no intent, and yet, unknowingly, it preserves. If civilizations older than memory walked before us, their story, however faint, may survive in this same fragile medium, spread thin across oceans, glaciers, plains, traces so diffuse, so subtle, they do not reveal themselves to us directly. We must choose to listen differently, to see importance in the weightless and the overlooked. Time measured in dust is not time measured in clocks. It has no precision we can hold, no boundaries clear to the touch. It is both fleeting and eternal, both present and ancient. A handful of dust may contain the echoes of forests long gone, volcanoes long silent, species long extinct. And perhaps, just perhaps, the dust also holds echoes of lives we have never met, voices written in elements now scattered everywhere. Was this grain once part of a tool? Was that particle the ash of a fire made not by lightning but by intention? We may never know. But across Earth, billions of such grains swirl endlessly, each one an unanswered possibility. And perhaps it is in dust that the deepest humility lies. It tells us we are temporary. We too will become dust. Our buildings, our voices, our books, all one day reduced to fine particles carried by winds. And yet, as with those before us, dust will remember just enough to remind what comes next. That something once lived, once shaped, once wondered. The record is faint, but it will be there, read not in clarity, but in possibility. And so, if dust can measure centuries grain by grain, what then of the soil and stone beneath it, where stranger patterns in chemistry and isotope can testify of deeper histories still, histories perhaps never meant to reach our eyes? Beneath the drifting veil of dust, soil waits, layer upon layer, dark strata pressed into place by seasons, by floods, by forgotten forests that once stood firm and are now gone. Soil is not just earth beneath our feet. It is the repository of vanished climates, of vanished ecosystems, of vanished epochs. It is full of signatures, chemical oddities, isotopic traces, quiet codes written in atoms. The question is not whether these signatures exist, but whether we know how to read them. We already listen in this way. When scientists core sediments or sample ancient soils, they look for isotopes of carbon and nitrogen, for ratios of oxygen that whisper of temperatures, for spikes of sulfur that hint at volcanism or cosmic strike. Soil does not speak in words, but in numbers. A sudden rise in carbon isotopes tells of burning, whether wildfire or fuel. A rare abundance of iridium tells of meteors striking with world-ending force. These peculiarities are the language of soil, and within this strange language, perhaps clues might linger, elusive, pointing not just to geologic cause, but to something else, something deliberate. What if chemical patterns exist that resist simple explanations? A distribution of metals too regular, concentrated as though smelted and scattered, compounds which appear briefly in the record, then vanish, as though they belong to some activity, rather than to nature's steady rhythms. Even today we see signatures in the soil that are undeniably our own: synthetic pesticides, microplastics, radionuclides from nuclear tests, chemical residues that no volcano, no asteroid, no glacier could reproduce. These are technofossils, markers of civilization ingrained into Earth's chemistry. If ours now exist, ugly, unmistakable, could earlier worlds have left their own? Of course, we must tread carefully with such wonderings. Most anomalies yield to natural explanations when examined closely. The Earth is vast, endlessly inventive, prone to strangeness. What looks initially like impossible order often resolves into mere geology after deeper study. And yet, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. In the patterns, in the irregular isotopes, in the unexplained horizons, there remain questions. Could these buried whispers be residues of long-erased experiments, industries, or even ways of life we can no longer imagine? Soil also breathes. It interacts with air and water, changing long after a civilization might be gone. Elements leach away, seep deeper, or scatter wide. Some records, though, are stubborn. Stains of lead, deposits of heavy metals, peculiar concentrations of carbon that remain through eons. Our hands brush through such layers, and we interpret as best we can a supervolcano's winter, a comet's impact, or most often, the restless churn of natural change. But in the silence between these readings, another voice remains plausible. Might some isotopic quirks be the shadows of intelligence, erased beyond recognition, but carried still in element and trace? Imagine a world before ours, experimenting with fire, with chemistry, with energy. Plastic and steel need not have been their medium. Perhaps they made tools from substances we would not call tools, harnessing things we would overlook as natural variation. Archaeology on human timescales often confuses ritual with trash, signal with noise. How much more so geology stretched across millions of years? Could we even recognize intention if its material lay outside the bounds of what we expect? There are times when soil presents us with boundaries in its records. Black horizons, where sudden charcoal speaks of immense fire. Thin lines of ash carried globally, marking a single day when the sky fell dark. Radiation traces embedded invisibly, permanent, like silent witnesses. From these, entire chapters of Earth's story are revealed. Yet for every clear line, there are many blurred, many uncertain. Entropy folds the story, overlays one moment with another, until the result is both a message and a puzzle. Like half-heard music, it is difficult to know whether what calls to us is real or imagined. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Even our own Anthropocene leaves us wondering how recognizable it will be. Our nuclear markers will glow for hundreds of millennia. Our plastics will endure, littering sediments with bright polymers geology never knew before. Yet, give enough time, and even these will break. Plastic becomes waxy dust. Concrete returns to fragmented minerals. Steel rusts to red powder, folded back into soil's body, millions of years hence. Even our boldest traces may appear subtle, a strange smear of chemicals, an unexplained mineral seam. Could it be the same for others before us? If they ever were, could their marks have blended so profoundly into natural background that we see them every day, without knowing? Soil has always concealed and revealed in uneven measure. It hides pottery until rainfall forces shards to the surface. It protects seeds for thousands of years. Sleeping until found, it locks away whole forests, petrified and silent, until a river cuts just right to unearth them again. Perhaps then what soil holds from vanished civilizations, if any existed, is not lost but simply buried deep, waiting for the right question, the right eyes, the right act of wonder to uncover. And in this there is humility too. Soil is unassuming, a quiet threshold between dust above and stone below. Yet, it may carry some of the planet's rarest clues. It does not beg to be read, but when we do, we glimpse constellations not in the sky but beneath our feet. Constellations of isotopes, scattered signals suggesting a history both stranger and older than we imagine. And so we ask softly, without needing a final answer, in these subtle signatures, are we tracing only geology, or are we stroking the faintest fingerprints of forgotten builders, whose memory is carried, not in monuments, but in atoms themselves? And yet, if the soil can whisper through isotopes and anomalies, what might extinction itself conceal or reveal within its long pauses, those sudden silences where life retreats, and perhaps with it, civilizations as well? Extinction carries with it an aura of finality, and yet when we listen closely, extinction speaks less as an ending, and more as a silence between songs. Earth has endured 5 great mass extinctions, each one reshaping the fabric of life, each one pulling entire lineages into darkness. Trilobites, ammonites, great forests of the Carboniferous, the mighty reptiles of the Mesozoic, all rose, flourished, and disappeared. And still the Earth continued, reshaping herself from the ashes of what was lost. But within those silences, the question lingers, what else may have vanished, unrecorded, unremembered? We speak often of species, of ecosystems, of biodiversity collapsing, yet extinction does not discriminate. If cultures, if intelligences had emerged before us, might they too have been caught in such collapses, erased not by war or failure, but by the hand of geological catastrophe? Entire histories could be swallowed by those sudden pauses in life's continuity, reduced instantly from presence into absence, from detail into blankness. Consider the end Permian extinction, 252 million years ago. So total was its reach that 90% of life disappeared. Oceans suffocated, forests fell silent, the air itself carried poison. In that immense purge, even human imagination struggles to fit. What if, somewhere in those lost ecosystems, a flicker of awareness existed, some mode of intelligence adapted to a world we can scarcely picture, swept away in a single geological sigh? The fossil record shows turmoil, heat, volcanism, chemical storms in the sea, but it tells us so little of the whispers that might have existed in its margins. Could intelligence too fall victim, leaving the Earth barren, not only of forms, but of voices? We think of civilization as persistent, yet history, even within human time, teaches fragility. Cities drowned by sea, languages erased by conquest, knowledge turned to dust in fires. How much less would remain given the violence of an extinction-scale event? Asteroid strikes, global glaciation, volcanic floods covering continents with fire. What then survives such calamities? Often only strange residues, spikes of iridium, sudden charcoal layers, frozen markers in isotope ratios. These are the punctuations of Earth's diary, terse and incomplete. Whatever detail was there, architecture, song, language, disappears so thoroughly it no longer carries a name. And yet, extinction is not only loss, it is also a pivot. After every silence comes renewal. The world that rises is not the same, yet it carries faint echoes. Reptiles expanding after amphibians, mammals after reptiles, humans after mammals again. Life layers over its absence, until absence itself becomes invisible. Perhaps civilizations too, if they ever arose, reside only as faint echoes within these shifts, erased beyond recognition, knitted invisibly into the fabric of what grew next. The silence between songs may carry more resonance than the notes themselves. What fascinates us is how extinction leaves absence as a form of presence. Entirely missing groups of fossils are an anomaly. We look and we find voids where a thriving record should continue. Something powerful swept clean the page. Life has returned, but the gap remains an imprint of what was taken. Could it be the same for cultures, for civilizations? That absence itself, the sense that something ought to be there but is not, might be the strongest echo, the only trace left. Extinction reminds us too that entropy is not gradual alone. Sometimes it arrives in a rush, tearing vast swaths of life into silence within the span of centuries or days. In such moments, memory is not just forgotten, it is shattered, incinerated, swept away before it could ever fossilize. It is this fragility that humbles us. So much can be lost so fast, and the Earth continues as though nothing unique had vanished. The oceans refill, the forests regrow, the silence becomes sound once more, and the memory of what was dissolves into background. Still, extinction leaves us wondering whether the absence we see might occasionally mask stories we cannot prove but cannot dismiss. Was there, in those vanished ages, intelligence not like ours but different, confined to a brief bloom, taken before it could leave a mark secure enough for us to know? Maybe not. Maybe never. But maybe. And that maybe haunts the very concept of extinction, for it reminds us that the missing is larger than the known. In the quiet that follows thoughts like these, one lesson drifts forward. Every extinction redistributes possibility. What was erased makes room for what follows. In that sense, extinctions are both destroyers and midwives. They conceal histories, but they also give rise to futures unborn. Within their shadows, perhaps rest echoes of things that tried and failed, or perhaps vanished too completely for us to ever know. They remind us that memory is incomplete, not because it ignores, but because it cannot hold everything. And so we breathe into that silence, into the spaces where extinctions have swept their hand across time, and we acknowledge that what is absent can be just as powerful as what remains. Perhaps the faintest echoes of old civilizations are not to be found in what we discover, but in what we can never find. The hollow spaces in the record, the vanished possibilities that history cannot restore. And if extinction carries so thorough a silence, then we must wonder still when no bones, no seeds, no ruins survive. What of the carbon? Does the breath itself linger in the strata, thin and chemical, writing a quieter memory that even extinction itself cannot fully erase? Carbon is the quiet signature of life. We inhale it, exhale it, weave it into our bones, our blood, our breath. From the soft tissue of leaves to the lattice of diamond crystal, carbon is both fragile and eternal. It slips easily between forms, gas, graphite, soot, yet never departs this world. In every epoch, it has borne witness, shaping both the rise and the vanishing of entire lifelines. And even when voices are gone, when civilizations collapse into entropy, the carbon remains behind, silent, untranslatable, but there, In ancient strata, carbon ratios tell stories of climates long past. Isotopes of carbon in shells reveal how warm oceans once were. Charcoal in sediment announces great fires that swept across continents. In times of abundance, soils gleam rich and dark with organic matter. In the aftermath of catastrophe, only thin, pallid lines remain. To measure the world in carbon is to eavesdrop on life's forgotten breaths, carried forward across millions of years. And still, the silence is striking. Where once entire landscapes of forest stood, we sometimes find only a thin seam of coal, pressed and preserved through unimaginable pressure and time. What was once vibrant, teeming, audible with birdsong, is reduced to a black ribbon in stone. The detail is missing, the complexity erased, yet the carbon stays, denying extinction its total victory. It is memory without narrative, presence without explanation. The silence of carbon reveals what once was alive, but not who, not how, not why. For humans, this silence is unsettling, because our own footprint is rich with carbon. Industry fills the air with it. Cities bloom in its burning. It drifts into glaciers, lakes, the surface of oceans. If one day we are gone, this altered atmosphere, this thin but abnormal layer of blackened carbon in the rocks, may be our only signature. No buildings might endure, no languages, no stories, but carbon will linger, silent and impartial. And the same must be asked of ages older than us. If there were civilizations before, what carbon shadows might they have left behind? Perhaps we see them already. An unexplained spike in ancient record, a sudden surge of carbon dioxide that cannot fully be accounted for by volcanoes alone. The Paleocene-Eocene thermal maximum, 56 million years ago, still confounds. A rapid warming, strange changes in carbon isotopes. The Earth herself records something dramatic, but the cause remains incomplete in clarity. Was it volcanic fire? Was it methane collapse? Or could it have been something unthinkable, an industrial rise and fall, so far gone in time it left only this chemical murmur in the soil? Science, cautious and precise, tends toward natural causes, but the whispers remain. Carbon tells us something happened, even if it cannot tell us what. And in this, carbon plays the role of an archivist, without voice, always present, never explanatory. It remembers only that there was breath, there was life, there was combustion. It does not say whose or why. It is the faint afterimage of memory, stripped bare of story. We touch this silence often, a cave rich with soot, but no fire circle to explain it. Layers of char in Arctic ice, with no source we fully understand. A dark seam in deep rock, black as ink, testifying only that once, somewhere, something burned. It is easy to dismiss these as nature, wildfires, eruptions, decay, but nature and culture blur together over spans of millions of years, and so the silence lingers, not because it speaks falsely, but because it cannot speak at all. Perhaps it was always this way. Perhaps extinction reduces every civilization, no matter how vast, into little more than a chemical aftertaste. Perhaps all of us become carbon eventually, written thinly into the Earth's library, not as individuals, not even as species, but as measurements, ratios, absences and surpluses. It is a humbling thought. In the deep perspective of time, we are carbon, nothing more, collapsed into silence, reduced to numbers. And yet, even in silence, carbon's persistence is miraculous. It flows endlessly, recycled from fire to air, from body to soil, from fossil to flame again. The same carbon atoms in your body once drifted in ancient seas, once hung as gas in the breath of creatures we will never know. They remember in a way we cannot, cycling forever, passing from form to form, never telling but always carrying. Perhaps through them, there is a thin thread of connection between everything that has lived, civilizations forgotten and civilizations unborn. So we pause here, in the quiet, listening to the testimony of carbon. It cannot recount names or languages, but it confirms this. Something lived, something burned, something stood for a time against entropy, before yielding back to silence. In fragments like these, maybe we are already looking at the traces of others, misread as accidents of climate. And if even carbon cannot tell the full story, then what of erosion, those patient waters and winds that grind mountains and monuments alike into new landscapes, reshaping the very evidence under our feet until it too disappears? Erosion begins quietly, a droplet of rain loosening a grain of soil, a breath of wind carrying fine dust into the air, a river curling beneath its banks, carrying silt away grain by grain, until an entire valley is reshaped. We often think of destruction as violent, sudden, loud, but the greatest eraser on Earth is patient, rhythmic, and soft. Erosion does not arrive with fury. It whispers, it waits, and in waiting it forgets. Every monument we carve, every road we lay, every home we build is, from the perspective of water and wind, nothing more than temporary sculpture in a world carved by patience. The pyramids stand tall, but already their stones are softening, their sharp edges lost to the timeless desert breath that surrounds them. Ancient temples, once brilliant with color and line, are reduced to outlines, their carvings faint. Rivers grind mountains until they are plains. Glaciers smooth whole landscapes, leaving cliffs polished and faceless. Given enough time, even continents are consumed, broken apart, washed into the sea, folded back into the mantle. What chance, then, do the fragile architectures of civilizations hold in the face of such endless silent erasing? If we imagine others before us, perhaps even older than our deepest history, then we must also imagine the power of erosion against them. A city left untended becomes ruin in centuries. In 1,000 years, its walls collapse. In 10,000, soil has reclaimed it. In 1,000,000, a river may have ground it flat, a glacier may have crushed it, or winds may have smothered it beneath dunes. In 10 million years, the likelihood of anything recognizable remaining is nearly zero. Not because those cities never existed, but because erosion has completed its task, patiently, fully, mercilessly, without intention. We see evidence on smaller scales all around us. Consider landscapes like Petra in Jordan. Exquisite rock facades carved into cliffs. For a while they endure, stunning to behold. But look closely, and the lines are softening, faces dissolving, columns no longer crisp in their geometry. Rain, sand, temperature, time, always working. Consider also the ruins of coastal cities, edges surrendering to the sea as waves crash, scrape, and drag their remnants farther and farther into absence. It is erosion that completes forgetting where entropy begins. And yet, erosion is not entirely cruel. In some cases, it protects as it erases. A layer of sand drifting over an artifact can hide it from sun, air, and decay, keeping it safe for millennia. Volcanic ash covering a city like Pompeii, both destroyed and preserved, burning lives into stone, freezing them in place. In this strange paradox, erosion and burial are partners, sometimes finishing memory, sometimes conserving it, but both silence detail, both reduce living histories into fragments, sometimes misread, often invisible. There is also beauty in erosion's slow hand. It teaches us time through its visible traces. A canyon carved by rivers reveals layers of stone, miles deep, each one an epoch compressed into color and line. Mountains worn to gentle hills remind us that nothing, no matter how vast, is immune. To walk across a desert plateau, eroded flat, is to walk across forgotten summits, mountains that once touched the skies and now linger low to the horizon. If civilizations once crowned such ridges, what chance had they against wind and rain that never cease? The earth herself is sculptor, and her medium is forgetting. Erosion erases not quickly but fully. Buildings, inscriptions, roads left untended in a humid forest disappear in decades, smothered by vines and roots. In deserts, wind polishes every stone until text itself vanishes into smooth surfaces. In ice, glaciers churn debris into a powdered anonymity, and beneath the sea, currents wash foundations until they are indistinguishable from the natural seabed. The processes are silent, but total. They ensure that time will not hesitate to cleanse. But erosion is also a storyteller, if we learn how to read its faint lines. The Grand Canyon, though carved by the Colorado River, is also an archive, its walls speaking of seas and deserts long gone, of climates forgotten. In its erosion lies revelation. Perhaps that is how memory works, not to preserve detail, but to reveal just enough in fracture and fragment to hint at a story once whole. Could it be, then, that even vanished civilizations leave traces here, not as intact evidence, but as subtle alignments, curious anomalies in stone, carved, erased, half-remembered? We wonder how many histories have been reduced so completely that their silence seems natural. How many shapes have been mistaken as natural cliffs when once they were touched by hand? How many fragments of roads now resemble nothing more than broken ridges of rock? Erosion is thorough but not always merciful. It never clarifies, it blurs, softens, and transforms until truth becomes uncertain. Perhaps erosion is not just the eraser of memory, but the shaper of mystery. Without erosion, the earth would hold permanence, perhaps too much. With erosion, everything is softened, made ambiguous, left open to interpretation. It is this openness that invites our wonder, our questions, our what if. The lack of certainty draws us into speculation, into humility, into quiet awe before time itself. And so erosion continues, drop by drop, gust by gust, wave by wave, whispering away our monuments even as we live among them. One day, our bridges and skyscrapers, our statues and towers too will dissolve into indistinct ridges of stone, and in their absence, the earth will go on carving, unbothered by whether any trace of us remains. And yet, if erosion can soften the edges of stone and erase entire worlds, what then of memory itself, the ways we hold on to stories only to lose their sharpness over centuries? If landscapes can forget, then might we not share their same fate, the very shape of forgetting written not only in rocks but in us too? Forgetting has a form, not abrupt, not final, but gradual, folding over like pages pressed together until the story blurs and the words lose their order. Just as erosion softens stone, so forgetting softens memory. In us, as in the earth, sharp details become shadows, bright voices, quiet to whispers, until all that remains is suggestion. The shape of forgetting is not absence alone, it is transformation, a change from clarity into haze, from vivid into faint. Civilizations know this shape well. Languages vanish when lips can no longer carry their syllables. Cities dissolve when caretakers are gone, when commerce withers, when new life grows atop the old floors. We hold memory for a while, as if firmly, but entropy ensures release. Every archive, whether of stone or of mind, eventually succumbs. Knowledge, once treasured, drips away, leaving only fragments. A myth carried by storytellers may be all that survives of an entire world of intention and achievement. A single character scratched into rock may outlast an entire library burned to ash. This is the shape of forgetting, selective, uneven, unpredictable. The Earth, too, forgets this way. She remembers volcanoes in ash layers, but forgets the rituals performed beneath their smoke. She remembers extinctions in isotope signatures, but forgets the forms of love or struggle among the creatures lost. Such forgetting is inevitable, but it forms a pattern, every detail erased, every story unwoven, and yet a residue remains. Not nothing, never nothing, but an outline so faint that interpretation becomes guesswork. In this way, memory and imagination are tied, each relying upon the other to bridge what forgetting obscures. And perhaps that is why forgetting has beauty as well as sorrow. In the blurring of detail, a freedom emerges. What is gone becomes pliable, dreamlike, reshaped by those who linger after. The ruins invite speculation. The void invites myth. Without forgetting, we would know only certainty. With forgetting, we are invited into wonder, into possibility. It humbles us with its mystery, the knowing that there was once presence, and the simultaneous awareness that presence is gone. It takes courage to sit inside that silence. But forgetting is also within us as individuals. Memory decays with years, reshaping our lifelines into vaguer stories. We recall outlines, not detail. We hold moments, not sequences. Our minds themselves are vulnerable to entropy, as fragile as stone carved by rain. What patterns fall away in us are mirrored in the world around us. We too blur, we too dissolve. The earth reflects herself in us. Her stories fade in rock as ours fade in thought, and together we share the inevitability that forgetting is as much a law as gravity. Still, forgetting leaves strange survivors. Sometimes, a single bone in a field tells of a species. Sometimes, a sentence in a manuscript redefines history. Sometimes, a fragment of pottery suggests a vanished life of water, shelter, community. What was once totality is reduced to glimmers. Yet, in those glimmers, entire worlds are reconstructed in science, in imagination, in the quiet human yearning to resist entropy's flow. Our minds, our research, our dreaming are acts of resistance against forgetting, even though we know ultimately it cannot be beaten. Perhaps that is why we seek not to conquer forgetting, but to honor the shape it leaves behind. We must ask, then, if civilizations before ours were indeed swept into silence, what fragments, what stubborn relics might endure even now, unrecognized? Are there shards of memory in unnatural isotopes, in layered soot horizons, in enigmatic artifacts mistaken for accident of rock? The shape of forgetting ensures they will be incomplete, ambiguous, hard to read. But perhaps that incompleteness is unavoidable. Each layer of uncertainty is simply part of the pattern, part of the Earth's rhythm of remembering, just enough to remind us that memory was once there. And so forgetting becomes its own form of remembrance, not in detail, but in echo. When we see the softened lines of a ruin, or hear an oral story that drifts into myth, we glimpse that perfection is not the goal, survival of fragments is enough. Even absence itself, the visible gap where we expect continuity, is a kind of evidence. Forgetting is not emptiness, but shape, not erasure, but residue. We live surrounded by such shapes. Every broken monument, every forgotten word, every anonymous fossil is the contour of something once whole. Even when we cannot rebuild the fullness, the outline holds importance. It tells us gently, there was once something here, even if you cannot know it fully. Perhaps the earlier civilizations, if they existed, are already before us in this way, not wholly lost, not wholly remembered, but visible in the foggy contours of unexplained anomalies, in echoes of architecture within the natural, in myths too old to trace. And in this shared fate, we sense humility. We are not exempt. Our monuments too will soften, our words blur, our stories fracture. We will become another expression of the shape of forgetting. And perhaps, long after, one shard, one faint seam of carbon, one mysterious anomaly in soil will serve as our outline. Future minds will wonder as we do now, caught in the same question, who else was there, in the silence that came before? And so, if forgetting itself has a shape, then might the ice, with its crystalline grip, be one such shape of memory and loss entwined together, preserving air and pollen, while erasing all else. Ice is a paradox of memory, at once a perfect preserver, and at the same time, a destroyer of form. It captures with exquisite detail the smallest traces of air, the shadows of pollen, the faint chemistry of a forgotten sky. But it crushes forests, grinds mountains, and scours entire valleys clean of all that once stood upon them. Ice remembers breath, but erases architecture. It files away whispers of time, even as it wipes away the presence of life itself. Within polar cores, air bubbles lie trapped for millions of years. They are crystalline vaults, each a small capsule of atmosphere, still breathing from ages past. Through them we hear the voice of climates now gone. How much carbon floated above oceans, how sharply temperatures rose, how ash and smoke once drifted briefly before settling. Ice holds these perfectly, as though time itself paused in its descent, and yet ice shows no mercy to the structures that may have stood nearby. If a city once lay upon frozen plains, advancing glaciers would grind it into powder, swallowing walls into stone dust, erasing record as though it never was. There lies the haunting possibility for tens of thousands of years. Vast continental expanses were either buried beneath ice sheets or newly revealed when seas withdrew into glaciers. These ceaseless movements of freezing and thawing erased entire landscapes generations after generations may have walked upon. If unknown cultures once built along those shifting edges, then they exist now as ghosts in both directions, flattened beneath advancing walls of ice and drowned beneath seas when the ice later released its hold. Between those movements lies a silence, a deep uncertainty, where speculation alone dares to wander. We see tiny fragments of survival within the ice. Mammoths, perfectly preserved, with hair still intact, eyes unclouded, stomachs still holding the last grass they ever ate. Their bodies remind us of how precise ice can be as an archivist. If it can keep flesh for 30,000 years, could it, by some miracle, have preserved fragments of structures, tools, or evidence hidden beneath miles of frozen concealment? Perhaps. And yet our access is limited. The deeper we dig, the more fragile the record becomes. Drilling cores may bring us clues, but the vast depths remain beyond full reach. Ghosts of possible civilizations may lie there in silence, held in frozen secrecy, waiting far longer than we have patience to wait. But ice also deceives us. It melts, it moves, its memory is impermanent. Even as glaciers press evidence flat, warming eras return the flood, breaking the vaults, pouring silence into rivers and seas. What we once might have recovered is washed away. What stories ice once carried are lost in its retreat. Even now, as we watch polar regions wither, we know the archive is vanishing in real time, stories melting, unreturnable, as air once sealed drifts again into the atmosphere. What secrets in those layers will never be read, because they became water, flowing to the sea without once passing beneath our eyes. And still, ice invites awe. It is a translucent metaphor for mortality itself, to save and to erase, to preserve detail in some ways while denying it in others. The very clarity of an ice core, with its bubbles shining like frozen stars, is a paradoxical reminder. Memory lasts by chance, by condition, by fragile miracle, not by permanence. If civilizations once strayed into glacial ages before ours, their existence may now be nothing more than anomalies recorded in chemical ratios, a spike of methane here, a surge of carbon there, data signs mistaken for pure climate variation. In this, we are left wondering whether we are already holding their records in hand, misinterpreting their silent presence as mere geological quirks. Perhaps civilizations lost to the ice are not gone entirely, but spread, their remains ground down into fine minerals, carried by glacial melt, scattered across plains, incorporated unnoticed into soils and rivers. To look for their architecture is futile. We must instead listen to chemistry, to subtle signals woven invisibly into the ice, soil and stone. We must redefine what it means to search for memory in a world where forgetting is the rule. And so we pause with humility. Ice teaches us that memory is fragile, divided between preservation and obliteration. A mammoth intact beside a flattened forest. A pristine bubble of air above a valley scoured. In its cold embrace there is truth, and emptiness, and silence. What survives is always fragmentary, always partial, but perhaps even fragments are enough. The faint, frozen ghosts that remind us not of what was exactly, but that something was, and is no more. And if ice can preserve and erase with such equal precision, then how much stranger still are the minerals that grow deep within the earth, crystals and stones that sometimes bear within them chemical signatures we cannot explain, as though matter itself once witnessed an intelligence that has now faded from view. The earth is fluent in the language of minerals. Crystals grow in precise obedience to chemistry, each atom slotting into order like a note in a score. Diamonds blossom deep within pressure. Quartz forms in steady lattices. Feldspar binds the very bones of continents. Every mineral has logic, a method, a pattern we can read. And yet, scattered within these patterns, we sometimes find minerals that appear strange, substances that whisper of conditions too unlikely, too abrupt, too artificial for nature alone. These anomalies stir wonder, and with it a question: what if not every stone was born of geology alone? Our own time has already altered the mineral kingdom in ways that will resonate far longer than we will endure. Humans have birthed hundreds of anthropogenic minerals, concretes, slags, alloys, synthetic crystals, plastics disguised in rock. Many of them would never appear without intentional process. And once buried, they may remain for millions of years, indistinguishable from natural strata, unless recognized for their oddities. If we can already transform Earth's mineral record beyond recognition, then perhaps others before us could have done the same. Could their quiet residues be sitting before us now, misclassified as curiosities of nature? Sometimes it is subtle, a mineral assemblage, forms that does not fit its environment. A crystal structure aligns with improbable symmetry. A chemical ratio defies local origin. Each instance finds a scientific explanation, but explanations are provisional. They bend toward what we expect of Earth's processes. What if one or two anomalies slipped past interpretation, filed into our textbooks as ordinary, when in fact they are residues of choice, remnants of work done by hands or minds erased? Consider trinitite, a green glass, born when the first nuclear explosion fused desert sand into stone. Nothing like it had existed before, but now it is part of Earth's story, embedded in mineral classification. Future geologists, millions of years from now, would find such fused glass and note it curiously. A material neither volcanic nor cosmic, it would not be unexplainable, but it would be strange. An outlier. Perhaps we stand already among earlier outliers, unattributed to any willful act, simply because we do not expect will before us. Minerals sometimes contain locked gases from atmospheres unlike our own. Others preserve oxidation states that suggest unstable conditions. Banded deposits seem to pulse with intervals of something rhythmic, not fully explained by volcanism or oceanic cycles. Our minds ache to grasp pattern, and sometimes pattern emerges, but the line between coincidence and record is thin. Just as myths blur into history, so too might mineral anomalies blur into evidence. One is interpreted as narrative, the other as geology, until questions arise. If we ask, why does this mineral exist here when it should not? The Earth usually answers, chance, uncommon chemistry, volcanic oddity. These explanations soothe curiosity, but sometimes, when the oddities multiply, another thought hovers gently in the silence. Could some of these stones be technofossils of an age long before us? Not remnants of creatures themselves, but of what they made. Even if such a thing were true, how could we know? Minerals are brutal toward memory. They hold atoms in precise lattices, but they do not hold context, or purpose, or names. They simply sit, unyielding, mute. The story they carry is written in ratios, in the presence of elements that should not belong, in the symmetry of growth that feels improbable. Minerals are guardians of detail, but not meaning. Meaning is left for us to wonder, to invent, to place gently upon their silence. And so, the thought becomes more subtle. Maybe these anomalies are not mistakes of geology, nor are they proofs of civilizations lost. Maybe they are reminders that the planet herself invents endlessly, and that her creativity overlaps with what we imagine as ours. The Earth does not separate human from natural, intention from accident. In her record, all is mineral, all is matter. Still, the oddities draw us close, leaning into silence where geology resists neat answers. In that leaning, the shape of our humility emerges. If there were civilizations before, their memory may not be written in ruins, but in stones we have already catalogued, unaware. Their legacy could be folded into museum drawers, labeled as rare, unusual, unexplained, but never questioned beyond the edges of established science. Perhaps the ghost of technology is already present in minerals we dismiss as natural curiosities. The distinction between should and shouldn't is only ours. The stone does not care, the anomaly rests in silence. And so, as we cradle such strange minerals in palm or microscope, we confront the possibility that Earth's memory may be stranger and subtler than imagination allows. A green glass mistaken for lightning's touch, an alloy treated as volcanic accident, a crystal whose harmony seems too exact, maybe natural, maybe not. The wonder lies in allowing ourselves to ask. And yet, if minerals raise such haunting questions, how much more would technofossils speak? Fossils not just of materials but of technologies, the unmistakable relics of civilizations forgotten. There is a word scientists use for the artifacts our age will leave behind: technofossils. They are not bones, not shells, not leaves pressed into stone, but plastics buried in marine sediments, concrete in new strata, radioactive isotopes sealed into ice. They are evidence of technology preserved as fossil, undeniable in their unnatural character. They tell future geologists, someone was here, and someone built. We cannot pretend otherwise. Our footprint is permanent, even as our cities may crumble. If this is true of us, then the imagination stirs. Could others, long before, have left their own technofossils, now misfiled in Earth's record? Perhaps melted glasses mistaken for volcanic, metal alloys interpreted as meteoritic, mineral seams dismissed as accidents. The difficulty is not whether such fossils could exist, but whether we could recognize them, after millions of years of burial, compression, recycling. Time is not kind to design. It folds intention into coincidence, industry into anomaly, until all traces resemble geology alone. Our technofossils are already abundant. Plastic, for instance, now forms plastiglomerates, pebbles of melted polymer fused with sand and shell, stones that nature never made until we arrived. Concrete, poured on a planetary scale, will harden into indelible layers, its chemistry betraying manufacture. Radioactive isotopes from nuclear detonations, unnatural and unstable, are measurable in sediment worldwide. No natural event produces them. They are our signatures, the clearest technofossils of a species that altered its planet. And if we, in our infancy, already produce these markers, what of others who may have walked this cycle before? Perhaps they too left technofossils, objects or substances their world could not produce alone, but time conspires to hide them. Recycling of crust into mantle erases many layers. Erosion smudges evidence into anonymity. Even survivals may be overlooked, mislabeled as volcanic, as extraterrestrial, as coincidental. The very clarity of technofossils today, their obvious strangeness becomes obscured once time and entropy veil their context. Without context, all that remains is anomaly, waiting quietly, unnoticed. And yet the idea lingers, unsettling but tender. What if Earth has carried in her body, not one, but many civilizations, each leaving technofossils we no longer recognize? What if our planet cycles not only oceans and mountains, but intelligence itself, rising, vanishing, leaving behind a sedimentary whisper of technology already reduced to dust? Would we know, if we stood upon their traces now, or would we misread them, humbly, as accidents of geologic creativity? The silence here is instructive. For even as we contemplate technofossils, we must acknowledge their precariousness. They are clearer than ordinary fossils, but less abundant. A shell can fossilize countless times over, but how many plastics, how many concretes will endure 10 million years of tectonics? What percentage will survive, and what percentage will be gone forever? The future will see only scattered glimmers, not the fullness of our world. They may misinterpret us too, as we misinterpret the past. Still, some technofossils resist all erasure. Radioisotopes decay slowly, their half-lives stretching far beyond memory. Elements forged in reactors will remain traceable, even when languages are gone. Cemented plastics may endure as layered seams far into the future. These will become humanity's most durable testimony. Ugly, perhaps, but undeniable. And here again, our thoughts circle to those before us. Could their testimony, too, be locked in soil, unrecognized? Could their equivalent of plastics, metals, isotopes still reside in outcrops we have dismissed as natural? Urban ruins crumble, but chemistry lingers. Bridges fall, but alloys fragment into soil. Books burn, but ash enriches layers. Gone does not mean erased. Hidden in the chemistry of strata, the planet holds its archives. If there were forgotten civilizations, they would speak not in intact monuments, but in residues, artifacts reduced to chemical puzzles. Perhaps they already whisper in layers we call mystery, subtle spikes in compounds we do not fully grasp, a signal that there was once more than geology unfolding here. Technofossils carry a second echo too. They remind us of impermanence. They are evidence not only of presence, but of fragility. To imagine technofossils of the forgotten is to imagine civilizations as temporary bursts, marked only by traces they could not help leaving. And in that, there is a sobering question. If their technofossils remain invisible to us, will ours too go unseen? Will our age, with all its records, reduce finally to a thin layer of carbon, polymers, and isotopes, hinting faintly that we existed, but saying nothing of who we were? We may be remembered only for what we discard, not for what we aspire to. Perhaps technofossils are less testimony and more confession, evidence of civilization not preserved but surrendered, offered back to Earth's cycles of forgetting. If so, then ours will one day join the forgotten, folded into stone, waiting to be found by minds yet to come. And if technofossils are the signatures of civilizations erased, then what of Earth herself? Could she not remember beyond them, carrying a deeper memory woven into her very body, a kind of consciousness expressed not in words, not in stones, but in climate, cycle, and silence? What if the Earth is not merely the setting for memory, but memory itself? Not an archive to be read at leisure, but an active, living body in which memory is constantly written, erased, reshaped. In every climate cycle, in every mass extinction, in every rebirth of forest or reef, we might hear the faint rhythms of awareness, not human awareness, not animal even, but planetary, vast, slow, and indifferent to detail. Consider how the Earth responds to disturbance. A volcanic eruption blackens skies, the climate cools, life reorganizes, a surge of carbon warms the air, ice retreats, oceans swell, new ecosystems bloom. These are not passive adjustments. They are corrections, adaptations, systemic recalibrations. Some scientists describe this as feedback, as cycles, as homeostasis. But on a different scale, it begins to resemble memory. Events are noted, effects endured, patterns reshaped in a way that feels purposeful, even if the purpose only emerges from physics itself. The Earth remembers, not in sentences, but in balances. And perhaps this is the consciousness we struggle to name. A mind without narrative, without preference, without judgment. A mind expressed in fluctuations of oxygen, in the sweep and withdrawal of glacial ages, in the pulse between flourishing and collapse. Intelligence, we often think, requires voice or tool, art or symbol. But what if intelligence can also manifest as pattern held across billions of years? The Earth would be such a mind, not thinking as we do, but recording, folding events into her body, ensuring that nothing passes without leaving some impression somewhere. This is why even our own presence is already written into her. The surge of carbon in the atmosphere, the altered chemistry of soils laced with plastic, the radioactive isotopes scattered across sediments, all are entries in Earth's logbook. Long after we are gone, they will remain as punctuation, as bold passages that will alter what follows. This is not metaphor alone, it is literal. The Earth alters because of us, and in altering, she remembers us. Whether she values us is another matter. The remembering is impartial. But if Earth can hold our story so effortlessly, then might she also have carried others before us, now erased so fully, we sense them only as faint irregularities in natural record. We hunger for evidence, technofossils, anomalies. But perhaps the deeper record is not in artifacts but in the planet's own movements, her climate swings, her sudden silences. Perhaps mass extinctions are not only biological events, but the forgetting of civilizations carried away, folded into Earth's rhythm of correction. Imagine memory without detail. Memory not of who or how or why, but only that there was. This might be Earth's way of knowing, never precise, never clear, only a pattern, a cycle, an echo. When warmth surges unnaturally, she carries that into the strata. When carbon spikes, she records it. When radiation floods her soils, she locks it into minerals. In this sense, her memory resembles ours when we dream. Impressions, feelings, fragments without sequence. Consciousness not as clarity, but as endless unfolding. In the quiet of night, we sometimes feel this presence. A mountain range silhouetted in starlight, an ocean horizon, an endless desert plain. They stir something older than language. The planet feels vast enough to be awake, to be a presence we live within rather than upon. Not a mother, not a deity, but a consciousness too slow to measure, too broad to grasp. We are like sparks inside her body, flickers on her surface. She is the holder, the witness, perhaps even the dreamer that enfolds us. And maybe, just maybe, this planetary consciousness has preferences that we cannot perceive directly. Preferences for balance, for sustainability, for cycles that return to stability after chaos. If so, then civilizations, ours included, may not leave only inertia, but resonance. Perhaps they shift Earth in ways small or large, brief or permanent, until she incorporates those marks into herself. Our presence is already seeded in her memory, whether she sought it or not. But what humbles us most is the scale, for the Earth is not permanent either. She too is subject to the entropy of the cosmos. Her consciousness, if we call it that, will end one day when the sun swells and oceans boil away. Even planetary memory cannot be infinite. Yet until then, she is the recorder, the composer, the body of memory through which we move. Civilizations, extinctions, technofossils, all are expressions, fragments, shadows within her unfolding awareness. So when we ask what Earth may remember of us, we must also ask what she remembers of those who might have come before, long erased, but not entirely lost. For if this presence we call planetary consciousness exists, then forgetting is part of its shape, forgetting not as flaw but as design. She remembers enough to continue, but never enough to stop beginning anew. And so the question lingers, if Earth herself is mind, if climate and extinction and rebirth are the language in which she remembers, then perhaps silence is also part of her expression. Could it be that absence itself is her clearest testimony, a conscious act of holding back? Absence has its own sound, a resonance softer than silence itself. It is not the absence we notice quickly, like leaving a room and realizing the music has stopped. It is deeper, slower, a kind of hollowness hidden in the record of the Earth. Sometimes what we do not find tells us more than what we do, and within that space, within the quiet gaps, we hear questions rise, questions that never receive answers. The fossil record is thick with presence, crowded with bones, shells, imprints of leaves. Yet it is also riddled with voids. Periods where forms should continue, but do not. Places where abundance should flourish, but dwindles suddenly to nothing. Geologists recognize these as natural intervals, points of extinction or erosion, where conditions fail to preserve what lived. But when we listen as dreamers, when we allow ourselves the softness of speculation, these voids take on a strange beauty. They feel like pauses in a sentence, a missing word we keep trying to imagine. Absence may be an architecture of its own, a shape carved not of stone or wood, but of blankness. Imagine a civilization erased so completely by ice, by sea, by erosion, that no structure remained, yet its vanishing, its exact improbable absence becomes the remaining form. A missing layer where presence should have existed, a chemical line erased mid-sequence, exactly nothing, arranged as testimony. Could it be that absence is not failure at all, but Earth's subtle way of recording? We encounter this paradox when we sift through layers of rock. In some core samples, centuries are preserved with exquisite density, every grain of dust, every shift in oxygen. In others, whole millennia are gone, scraped away, unreadable. These missing chapters can be explained: wind eroded, rivers washed, glaciers flattened, yet in the narrative of Earth, it is precisely the silence that draws the eye. Absence is rarely empty. It is heavy, suggestive. It points to events so large, or so delicate, that survival was not possible. It is like listening for a voice and hearing only echo. Echo is not sound alone. It is absence shaped into presence. When we imagine lost civilizations, it is tempting to think only of what should remain: ruins, artifacts, technofossils. But perhaps the clearest evidence of such lives is in what does not remain. A silence where building should be obvious. A gap where continuity should carry forward. Perhaps the clean erasures, the voids where something should shout but whispers instead, are the true technofossils of forgotten intelligence. Absence itself becomes their legacy, a void shaped into a kind of presence we misinterpret as emptiness. Think of music. The notes matter, but so does the space between them. It is the pause that makes the rhythm breathe, the silence that gives notes their contour. Earth may compose in this way as well, filling certain ages with fossils, artifacts, abundance, while leaving others empty, austere, as if carved blank on purpose. Is it possible that absence could be Earth's chosen refrain, her most eloquent way of remembering that forgetting belongs to the cycle too? Even our human memories echo this pattern. We do not remember every day with equal clarity. Some are vivid, glowing in detail. Others vanish entirely, leaving only faint impressions, outlines of routine. Yet in the gaps, in the absences, meaning still resides. We are shaped by what we recall as much as by what we forget. The same rhythm may bind the Earth's memory, preserving fragments, erasing others, leaving a haunting silence that invites imagination. What haunts us most is the possibility that absence is not passive. Could it be that memory sometimes chooses silence, in order to protect, to conceal, to release? The universe, after all, is woven with veils, dark matter invisible to our eyes, black holes erasing light, deep waters catching every secret shipwreck without ever confessing. Perhaps absence is not failure, but boundary, a veil drawn where knowledge is not meant to pass. If civilizations existed before us, their absence may be the planet's quiet refusal to let memory linger. Of course, science sees absence differently, as problem and puzzle to be solved, as anomaly to be filled. But alongside science, we can allow ourselves to drift calmly into speculation, to treat absence not just as void, but as soundless record. The missing layers, the inexplicable silences, these may tell their own story, that we are not alone in being forgotten. That memory rarely survives whole. That silence speaks in its own language if only we soften enough to hear. Perhaps absence is the only testimony that repeats unfailingly. Everything ends, and almost everything is erased. In that erasure, Earth achieves her balance. We who dream of immortality resist this, and yet must bow to it. For in the grand rhythm of deep time, absence is not loss. It is continuity. It allows cycles to renew, species to arise fresh, civilizations to flourish, without endlessly inheriting the clutter of those who came before. Perhaps we cannot find their ruins, because absence itself was the renewal, the curtain falling so another play could begin. And so we breathe with this notion that silence is not empty, but filled with resonance. That absence builds architecture as surely as presence. That blankness has mass, weight, consequence. And as we feel the outline of that truth, another thought stirs quietly. If absence can speak so fully, then what currents run beneath it? What continuous flow of time itself is hidden there, shaping, folding, and carrying not only memory, but the very waters of forgetting? Time is not a sequence of moments. It is a current, flowing quietly beneath every fossil, every silence, every erasure. We think of it as linear, a line drawn steadily forward, but the Earth teaches something different. Her rocks, her rivers, her cycles whisper that time moves like water, steady, patient, carrying everything with it, shaping without pause. It does not stop to highlight victories, nor linger upon losses. It sweeps all equally into its ongoing tide. Stand upon the rim of a canyon, and gaze at the walls of layered stone. You are not looking at still history, but at rivers of time frozen in place. Each layer was once fluid silt, carried by flowing water, pressed into place and held by weight. What we see as rigid cliffs are really time flows, hardened currents that once drifted past. And still today, the Colorado River runs below, carving deeper, proving that time's river never ceases, only shifts its channel. This is perhaps why memory fails, because time does not pause to preserve. Only fragments settle to the bottom, caught in eddies, pressed into soil. The rest, the vast majority, flows away unnoticed. Civilizations may flicker, like reflections on the surface, wars, joys and dreams, shimmering for a moment before being carried away. Bones may sink and fossilize like sunken debris, but songs and languages ride the surface and are swept downstream until they dissolve. Time's river is selective, not by choice but by nature. It preserves some, buries some, and washes most away. We sense this within ourselves. Memory, like geology, fossilizes rarely. Of all our days, only a few impressions sink deep enough to last, layered in our minds the way sediments accumulate. The rest withdraw into oblivion, not by decision, but by drift. And yet these forgotten hours carried us just as surely as the remembered ones. Time is richer than we can hold. Forgetting is not failure, it is the release of what cannot be contained. The earth shows us the same. Consider deep ocean sediments, millennia of dust, plankton, volcano ash, drifting grain by grain to the bottom. If we drill through them, we pull up a timeline of climate, chemistry, life itself. Each millimeter is a century. But between those grains flow years upon years that were not caught, moments erased, as if they never were. The river beneath time runs smooth, while its sediments testify only partially. Presence and absence mingle always, both shaped by the current no one can escape. And perhaps civilizations too are subject to this river, not just in their fall but in their remembrance. If another intelligence rose before us, maybe they were simply carried downstream, visible only now as faint residues, occasional eddies of anomaly caught in the depths of the strata. We search for permanence, but permanence is an illusion of stillness. Time itself is always moving beneath us, carrying everything onward until all differences blur into one continuous flow. There is a humility in this thought. We imagine ourselves as builders of permanence, makers of monuments, protectors of memory, but rivers remind us that stone itself bends and flows with enough time. Rivers cut granite, flatten mountains, shatter continents into gravel. So too does time shape civilizations, however strong they believe themselves to be. The ruins we uncover today are miracles of survival, not the rule, but the rarest accident. The rule is forgetting, movement, erasure. And yet, even in forgetting, the river gives a gift. It does not halt, but it nourishes. Every layer of sediment nourishes what grows upon it. Every ruin, once crumbled, nourishes the soil. Every extinction nourishes the surge of life that follows. In this way, loss is never absolute. What is carried away becomes part of something larger. What is washed out of memory fertilizes new potential. Perhaps then, civilizations too become nutrients for what comes after. Their stories dissolved, their essence repurposed into cycles we cannot see. Still, the metaphor deepens. Time truly is a river, but one we inhabit rather than observe. We are not on its banks. We are within it, borne along by the same unstoppable flow. To wonder who came before us is to peer upstream, to imagine shapes blurred by distance. To wonder who comes after is to gaze downstream, where the river bends beyond our sight. And as we drift, we realize the current knows us better than we know ourselves, for it carries everything, without exception, without pause. Sometimes, when we listen in hushed places, the slow drip in caves, the murmur of waves at night, the circling wind in a canyon, we feel this current stirring beneath all things. It is not sound exactly, but rhythm. The world itself breathing in patterns older than history, the river beneath memory, beneath presence, beneath absence. It is not the kind of current we can escape. It is the current that makes us, that erases us, that carries us further than we realize, until one day we too blur into sediment, folded into the continuity of flow. And so the thought lingers quietly, soft as dusk. If time itself is a river, then are not even ashes preserved within it, dragged downward and reshaped, meaning that even what has burned, even what has fallen, may still live on, hidden deep within the molten memory of the earth. Beneath us lies a world we rarely imagine, not soil, not stone, but fire. The mantle, vast and slow, circulates like a hidden ocean of heat, carrying continents upon its restless back. It is both furnace and archive, swallowing whole landscapes through the quiet violence of subduction. Mountains, oceans, cities, entire volumes of Earth's surface are drawn downward over millions of years, pressed into darkness, liquefied into memory. We often speak of the mantle as destruction, yet it may also be the deepest keeper of traces, ashes folded into molten silence, waiting far below our feet. When tectonic plates collide, one slides beneath the other, taking with it a record of the surface world. Sediments, fossils, entire portions of habitat drift downward, transformed, under pressure we cannot fathom. At first they fracture, bake, recrystallize. Deeper still, they dissolve into magma. But not all is lost entirely. Chemical signals, isotopic fingerprints, mineral ghosts, these endure, entwined in volcanic eruptions far away, or preserved within inclusions that rise back through the crust as diamonds, as basalts, as lavas, carrying clues of ancient worlds. In this way, the Earth reuses her memory. She consumes it, yes, but she also exhales it back, disguised, transformed, folded into new skin. It is terrifying, but also wondrous, the notion that the ground we walk may contain recycled whispers of civilizations that once stood upon a very different surface, and if there were any before us, if their cities too slid into trenches, what remains of them now may not be recognizable as walls or artifacts, but as chemical oddities in volcanic flows, as trace residues in minerals, as unexplained inclusions within crystals mined far from where such substances should ever be. In a sense, those who vanish into the mantle do not vanish entirely, they are remade, carried in the bloodstream of the planet itself. The mantle has kept memory of catastrophic impacts. We know this from tiny spheres, ejecta formed when collisions with asteroids vaporized rock that later rained down. We know it from shocked quartz, from heated minerals, from anomalous isotopes. These are the ashes of planetary trauma, folded into the deep earth. If fire can keep the marks of a meteor, could it not also keep, however faintly, the marks of a civilization passed unknown into its belly? And yet, here too, the scale humbles us. For the mantle is not a careful librarian. Its preservation is chaotic, its handwriting smeared by heat. What descends may emerge millions of years later as volcanic glass scattered across a barren plain, ambiguous, untraceable. Still, its role cannot be dismissed. The mantle teaches that nothing upon the earth truly disappears. It only changes state. Ash becomes lava, fossil becomes mineral. Civilization itself may become an unreadable chemical whisper, untraceable to intention, but real nonetheless. Perhaps our own ashes are destined for similar fate. Cities consumed by tectonics, metals resmelted in magma, even our plastic technofossils, buried beneath seas, may eventually descend into trenches, incorporated into subduction zones. What will remain then? Perhaps not ruins, not history, but altered rock chemistry, strange byproducts embedded in magmas far into the future. For as we wonder about others before us, we must confront our own destiny, to be carried downwards, burned, transformed, released again, as something unrecognizable. The mantle is impartial. It does not choose which memories to soften or erase. All are equal within its furnace. But quiet wonder lingers in this impartiality. If matter is never lost, then somewhere in atoms carried beneath us may reside fragments of long-forgotten worlds. Civilizations, ours and others, could persist as ashes in the mantle, hidden within its rotation. Perhaps this is how memory truly functions on Earth, not as permanent record, but as an endless cycle of consumption and rebirth. Memory is thus not about detail, but about continuity. The continuity of matter, carrying endlessly through states, outliving contexts, refusing to vanish entirely. To imagine this is to surrender to humility. Our structures may not last, our languages may fail, our names vanish, yet in geologic terms, what we are is still folded into the depths, recycled across eras. Our carbon, our steel, our glass, our fire, drawn down, melted, remade. We live on as chemistry reborn, woven back into the pulse of a planet that has forgotten us, and yet still carries us within. In this way we never escape the Earth, and she never truly lets us go. Perhaps when we look upon distant lava flows, glittering with crystal or glowing with glass, we are glimpsing fragments of our own future, fragments of someone else's past. Perhaps within these flows lie technofossils we cannot separate from natural anomaly. Perhaps every eruption contains not only geology, but testimony, remnants of lives erased, rewritten now as stone. So we pause, unknowing, before the mantle's vast silence. It tells us only this: nothing survives as it was, but nothing is ever wholly gone. Ashes remain, reshaped in currents we cannot see. Forgetting here is not destruction, but transmutation. All memory folds inward, waiting, and then emerges again, unrecognizable but undeniable. And if memory can be reborn even from magma, then what new architectures might absence itself create? What vanishing might become structure? What collapse might leave behind forms built entirely from disappearance? Absence is not formless. It has weight, proportion, even design. When something vanishes, it leaves behind contours, impressions, hollows that carry meaning as surely as stone. We walk through deserts where rivers once flowed, and the absence of water is a shape on the land. We stand in eroded valleys where civilizations once stood, and the absence of walls is an architecture of its own. The earth does not build only with stone and metal. She also builds with silence, with void, with erasure. Consider caverns carved by collapse. Once whole, the stone gave way, leaving behind chambers wide enough to resemble cathedrals. These are architectures of absence, spaces made by loss, but still filled with form. Or think of canyons, sculpted by rivers long gone, their presence marked most clearly by their absence. Erosion takes presence away, but leaves structure in its place. So too might civilizations, if erased, create architectures more subtle, patterns not of preserved cities but of vanished ones. Absence held as design. When archaeologists step onto ancient ground, sometimes they find not walls but only post holes, small circles in soil where wood once stood. From absence alone, they reconstruct vast halls and dwellings. The blueprint survives in what is missing. Perhaps, if other civilizations once walked this planet on scales we cannot yet imagine, their legacy exists, not in what stands but in what is conspicuously empty. A vein of mineral thinned in ways the earth does not naturally produce. A plateau suspiciously flat amidst mountains jagged. Patterns that suggest absence as design, removal as architecture. The earth, through entropy, is a careful planner of disappearance. She erases cities, but in their place are fields. She swallows coasts, but in their absence arise reefs. Even ruins, left to collapse, become shelters for vines, for moss, for the roots of trees. Life flows into absence, filling it like water poured into empty vessels. This too is architecture, an architecture of forgetting that still builds new presence. The act of erasure designs new structures, though no builder intended them. Perhaps this is why absence resonates with such mystery. Its forms are not chaotic, but patterned in ways we cannot easily dismiss. Absence shapes us too. Memory erases moments, and yet the shadows of those forgotten hours define our story. We cannot remember every detail of childhood, but the absences leave outlines of who we are, impressions stronger than specifics. A person in our lives may vanish, but the empty chair, the silent space at the table, is architecture as well. Even within us, absence builds, and if this is true within one human soul, how much greater might it be written into the earth herself? Architecture of absence can deceive as much as it can reveal. A vanished road may appear as nothing more than a line of slightly different soil color. From the air, it may look like coincidence. From the ground, it may seem like natural variation. But within those lines, a pattern survives, saying, something was once here. Entire cities have been rediscovered, not because stone remained visible, but because absence from agriculture, from trees, from soil betrayed their outlines. The ghost of a building is still architecture, though invisible to the eye. And perhaps this mirrors a greater truth, that what we call lost civilizations, if they existed before us, may haunt the earth, not through monuments or tools, but through absences. Perhaps some absence in the geologic or biological record, unexplained voids at the edge of science, are their truest mark. Not pillars but missing sequences, not libraries but absent species, forgotten not because they left nothing, but because what they left was absence itself, an architecture designed by time. It is humbling to imagine such silence as structure, to think that a vanished people's greatest building might be the void where they once stood. But perhaps this is also their triumph, to dissolve so fully into the earth's cycles that their architecture outlasts even intention. Because absence, unlike stone, never weathers. It remains, open, waiting to be recognized as form. We often think of architecture as human, as cultural, but absence is older, a craft of geology and entropy, shaping time itself into spatial form. Valleys, hollows, ruined outlines, eroded plains, all are structures of vanishing. We live among them without often noticing. Every horizon is built of absences, every silence a kind of design. Maybe this is the truest way civilizations endure, Not in their buildings, but in the shapes their disappearances leave behind. Maybe those who came before us, if they came, rest now as architectures of absence, felt but not seen, haunting the soil and sky with patterns we half recognize but cannot name. And so we turn, softly, to the horizon of the Anthropocene itself. If absence is its own architecture, might entire civilizations erase into the rock as horizons, ghost stories marked only by a thin seam across stone? On geological maps, horizons are thin lines, the boundaries between ages, pressed flat into millimeters of strata. To our eyes they look simple, uneventful, just narrow seams of shale or clay. But to the earth, a horizon is a great pause, a turning of the page, the place where one chapter ends and another begins. Sometimes they appear dark with ash, sometimes pale with chalk, sometimes punctuated by chemical anomalies that no natural rhythm fully explains. They are thresholds of memory, pressed quiet into stone. We speak often of the Anthropocene, the human horizon mark, a thin layer destined to carry the residues of our existence. It will be there, plastics fused into new rock, spikes of carbon, isotopes born of split atoms, compounds no volcano could have made. Long after our languages dissolve, future ages will see this horizon as undeniable proof of presence. Our entire era written into a seam no thicker than a hand's breadth. And if ours stands so clearly, then what of others? What if there are ghost horizons layered deeper still, already beneath our feet, whispering not of nature, but of vanished civilizations? Lines of soot too fine to be wildfire alone, carbon surges too steep to match known volcanoes, subtle blends of metals spread uniformly across sediments. We know these anomalies exist, though we interpret them cautiously. And yet, if there were before us those who strained the world as we strain it now, would their horizon not appear much the same? Thin, ambiguous, easily explained away as natural, unless we dared to look deeper. Horizons are the Earth's most humbling storytellers, for they compress millennia into moments. An age of thriving forests may shrink to a band of coal, an age of extinction collapses into a brief smear of darkened clay. What once was diverse, beautiful, complex is translated to a thin line on a cliffside. Civilization, if it once arose beyond human time, may now exist only as such a horizon, a ghost horizon, a spectral seam telling us nothing of art, or thought, or identity. Only that presence briefly disturbed the silence before vanishing into it again. There is beauty in this tragedy. To imagine entire worlds reduced to paper-thin memory strips is to confront just how fragile permanence is. Yet still, the horizon whispers. It says, there was a change here, sudden, lasting, impossible to ignore. It cannot show us the builders, the thinkers, the dreamers, but it assures us that something shifted, that something mattered. The horizon is both forgetting and remembering at once. Perhaps this is why horizons feel haunting to us. Standing before layered cliffs, we are drawn instinctively to the seams, the subtle changes in color or texture. They feel like pauses in a story, breaths taken before the narrative moves on. Geology has no punctuation except these lines, yet they work upon us as memory does, marking transition, marking rupture. The ghost horizon is the silence that interrupts, making everything before and after seem sharper. We may never know if hidden within these horizons lie the echoes of civilizations long gone. Perhaps every strange horizon is simply climate, asteroid, volcanic surge, but perhaps some carry more, residues of choice, of technology, of life cycles, not entirely unlike ours. Either way, the horizon itself is still a ghost, a presence left behind by absence, a reminder that history is stitched, not in continuity, but in sudden collapses and rebirths. And so we return the question inward: what will our ghost horizon look like, when viewed long after us? Will it be only plastics and soot, radioactive isotopes, and concrete ash? Will it say nothing more than humans burned fuel, and changed the air? Or will some fragment, some unlikely survivor, carry forward a trace of story beyond chemistry? We cannot know. Perhaps the truest ghost horizon is yet to be written, as we stand here shaping it unknowingly with every fire, every factory, every breath. Ghost horizons humble us because they remind us of endings, not spectacular, not loud, but quiet compressions, richness narrowing into silence. Entire blooms of life collapsed until they become a thin smear. Civilization itself, no matter how vast, may be destined for this final reduction. Yet in that reduction is a kind of survival too. We may be forgotten in detail, but the horizon will always remain, a band to tell the truth that someone was here. That for a while, the earth carried us in her story. And so we lean into that thought. Quietly, as if drifting towards sleep, every horizon is both a monument and a gravestone, both presence and absence, both memory and forgetting pressed into stone. If civilizations before us left ghost horizons invisible to our eye, and if we too will one day compress into such a line, then we are not alone in vanishing. We are part of a continuum of being and erasure, folded into the same geologic rhythm, the same spectral architecture. And yet, if horizons are the quiet markers of what has been lost, then what of the distant gaze of futures beyond us, when the earth herself is gone, and another intelligence looks back? Will they find our line, and wonder not just what happened, but who we were? One day we too will be a scene in stone. Our sky will have long since cleared of voices, our cities will have dissolved into dust, our techno-fossils pressed beneath countless new layers, and yet the horizon of our existence will remain, quiet, thin, undeniable. If there are eyes in that future, if there are minds among the yet unborn or among stars we cannot know, they will find it. They will find us not as bodies, not as words, but as residue, and in that residue, they may pause and ask, who were they? To imagine the future looking back is to invert our own wonder. As we stand before cliffs, searching for faint horizons of the past, so too may they stand before ours. They may drill sediments, read isotopes, find the sudden surge of carbon, the trace of radiation, the unfamiliar compounds entwined with ancient shells. They may see evidence that a civilization once surged here, burned energy, changed climate, built briefly against the tide of entropy, and was then carried away. And they may wonder, just as softly as we now wonder about ghosts before us, why did they rise, and why did they pass? But what will they know of our detail, our art, our myth, our questions, our kindness? Almost none of it. For detail is fragile. Books are ash, voices are air, architecture is rubble. What endures is chemical, mineral, isotopic, a signature of presence stripped of meaning. The future will know that someone was here, but the lives within, the loves and fears, will be gone entirely. Just as we look backward and see dinosaurs, not the texture of their thought, trilobites, not the complexity of their being, memory folds life into symbols, never into fullness. And yet, this incompleteness is not meaningless. Perhaps we underestimate how much presence is conveyed simply by the fact of being, the evidence that we were here, even if nameless, faceless, forgotten, is its own gift to whatever comes after. For if they too look back at us and wonder, they will feel what we feel now, that humbling awe, that haunting suspicion that they are part of a much larger cycle of rise and erasure. They will feel themselves as echoes, as continuations of a story they cannot read, but cannot ignore. If other civilizations came before us, their traces have become questions, not answers, and we too will become question more than statement. The record of us will say less about who, and more about that there was. Perhaps that is all memory can offer when stretched across such monumental scales, the acknowledgement of existence itself. A mark that says, here was something luminous, fleeting, brief, and it mattered enough to leave a scar on the stone. And as the earth continues long beyond us, the lesson is humility. We will be remembered chemically, faintly, ambiguously, but that is not failure. That is belonging. To fade into stone, as countless lives faded before us, is to join the chorus of absence and echo, of memory, and forgetting, that makes the earth what it is. The future, when it looks back, will hear only faint resonance, but perhaps resonance is enough. Perhaps all civilizations become music this way, notes too faint to replay, but still enough to suggest there once was a song. And so we wonder about these minds in the future. Will they see our horizon and fear it, imagining collapse? Will they see it and admire, knowing we reach toward the stars? Will they understand the scale of our ambition, our sorrow, our beauty? Or will they see only numbers on a graph, black seams in rock, the mark of presence reduced to carbon? Perhaps they will feel what we feel now, before unexplained horizons of the ancient earth. Not certainty, but awe, not detail, but wonder, not knowledge, but humility, before the silence. For what if memory's truest gift is not clarity, but possibility? What if to be remembered as ambiguity is itself to remain alive, endlessly reimagined by those who come after? A faint horizon becomes infinite when it fuels generations of questions. A silence becomes full when filled with wonder. In this way, the earth ensures no presence is ever truly gone. We all become seeds of questions carried forward, rather than fixed answers. And so, when the future looks back, perhaps that is what they will inherit from us, not the detail of our days, but the open-endedness of our absence. A horizon that whispers, someone was here, and perhaps others were before them, and perhaps still more will follow. No finality, only continuity, an echo eternal, passed along, carried endlessly forward like light beyond its source. And if this is so, then we already stand within that horizon. Already our presence is slipping into memory, into stone, into silence. Already we are becoming the very echoes we now strain our ears to hear. Perhaps we have always been part of this cycle, both future and past, both presence and ghost. And yet, as we yield ourselves to that thought, we find no despair in it, only stillness. A calm awareness that to vanish into Earth's story is not to be gone, but to join everything that ever was and everything that ever will be.